Hi, my name is Hannah Fuker, and I'm conducting an oral interview as part of the effort to archive the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on individuals and communities in the Midwest for both the Western Wisconsin COVID-19 Archive and the Journal of the Plague Year COVID-19 Archive. Today's date is Thursday, April 29th, and the time is 3:33 p.m. As of now, there are 31,976,888 confirmed cases and 570,421 deaths in the United States. In Wisconsin, there are 597,358 confirmed cases and 6,815 deaths. 29.5% of the population has been fully vaccinated in the United States. Today, we are speaking with Wendy Villalva in Eau Claire, Wisconsin over Zoom. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me today and sharing your experience with the pandemic, Wendy.
Thank you for having me.
To start off with, would you be willing to share demographic information for the study, such as race, ethnicity, age, and gender?
Yeah. So do you want me to just say it?
Yeah, go.
Okay. I was born here in the United States, but my parents are from Mexico. So I am Hispanic, Mexican, and I identify as female. I think that was all the questions, right?
Age.
Age. Oh, and I'm 19 years old.
Okay, thank you. What are the primary things that you do on a day-to-day basis, such as job, extracurricular activities, school?
I am a full-time student at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. So most of my day I spend just going to classes or doing homework and things like that. For extracurriculars, it kind of depends on the day. Sometimes I'm involved with research, and sometimes I'm at the writing center and I'm working, or sometimes I'm a campus ambassador and I'm giving tours to students on campus. So it just really depends on the day.
So very busy.
Yeah, really busy.
Where do you live, and how would you describe what it's like to live there?
So currently I live in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. I live in an apartment that I share with 3 other roommates. And it's comfortable, I guess you would say. It's just like an average college apartment here in Eau Claire, kind of next to campus.
So when you first learned about COVID-19, do you remember what your thoughts were?
So I remember when my dad told me about COVID-19, and actually it was back in December, and he saw it over Facebook, and I didn't believe him at first. But then it just got really serious all of a sudden, and so that's kind of what I thought. It wasn't really serious at first, and then it just became a pandemic all of a sudden. So, yeah.
So it's safe to say your thoughts have changed a lot now?
Yeah, definitely, for sure.
So what issues were you most concerned about during the COVID-19 pandemic?
What issues?
Yeah.
Um, I know school was a really big factor. How I was gonna do academically when the pandemic began. Work was a really big thing as well, because I know a lot of people were unemployed. Thankfully, I wasn't, but and my family wasn't either. But I know that was a really big thing as well. And safety, that was also another thing. We didn't want to get sick. So those were just a couple things that we were worried about.
You mentioned that employment was an issue for you. Did you have a job during the pandemic?
Yeah, I did have a job. I had a couple jobs during the pandemic, but I know not everyone had employment. My family, we have extended family living in New York, and I know they were unemployed, and so we were kind of scared that my parents were gonna be laid off or something, but thankfully they weren't, and I was able to save my job as well.
What was it? What was your job that you did?
So I actually worked back home at a cheese factory. So it was just a summer job, and we were considered essential workers because of dairy. So yeah, that was my job.
How did you see things that you're doing at your job changing because of the pandemic? Were there more safety measures or?
Um, so I actually started the job right when right in the summer, so right when like COVID was kind of like evolving. So I didn't really see how work was before, but I did have like coworkers tell me that they like implemented like the mask mandate at work. Um, they had um, like little plastic coverings to separate us like during our lunch breaks and things like that. So that's just a few ways that they changed. But I personally didn't see any differences.
Has COVID-19 affected you and your family's day-to-day activities at all, or especially during lockdown? Or
Um, so I know one of the biggest changes was me having to leave the university last school year because I was a freshman at the time and I was living in the dorm, so I had to come back and stay with my parents. I know my siblings also had to go back home, and our home is pretty small, so it was like really hard to get adjusted to all of that. But other than that, that was like the biggest thing that we had to adjust to.
was it a shock being a freshman in college and having the pandemic happen and have to switch to online like that?
Yeah, I would definitely say it was, especially like comparing it to this year too. Because like last year we didn't get to experience like spring, and we didn't get a like everything just kind of shifted. Like labs were suddenly a lot more difficult to complete, and like the semester, like it's spring now, we're still on campus, and like now I get to see like the differences and stuff. But it was definitely really hard to get adjusted, especially since it was like my first year. Um, and yeah, I didn't really know like how it would change academically.
What are you studying at UW Eau Claire?
So I'm currently majoring in biology and double minoring in pre-professional health sciences and Latin American studies. Um, yeah, and hoping to use my degree later on in the future.
So how have you seen your classes adjust to being online, or have they done any unique things?
Um, so last school year, I know all of like our labs and stuff, they went online, and we had to do like virtual labs. So that was just like one of the adjustments. Other than that, it would just be like having class like um, online rather than in person, which is just doing it over Zoom or something. So that's just like one of the biggest differences that I noticed that they've done.
An unexpected freshman year, anyways.
It was different.
Has the COVID-19 pandemic changed how you associate and communicate with friends and family?
Um, yeah, sort of. So um, I really had to like socially distance like very early on. But like because of work and things, it didn't really like change a whole lot. And yeah, and like not being in school, I guess I didn't have like that interaction with people anyways. But uh, yeah, and because like I was a freshman too, I didn't really get to know too many people, and like I had graduated high school, so I wasn't going to school with them anymore. So it was just I don't think it like really changed too much, just like depending on like my circumstances. Yeah, during the pandemic.
So now that you've been back on campus, have things seemed more normal even?
I think so. I think a lot of the interactions that I have are just with like close friends or like my roommates. Um, and just like with like the organizations that I'm a part of. So yeah.
Okay. So things are starting to open back up and up now, but when people were encouraged to stay home, did you and your family and friends do that? And what did you do for recreation, or did you pick up any hobbies during quarantine or lockdown?
Um, yeah, so we did stay home like a lot. But we did as I mentioned before, we did still have like our jobs and things. So we would go to that, and I decided to work full time. So I spent a lot of my time just like at work. Um, but other than that, I think like going for walks or going to the gym. I know I started doing that a lot more. But yeah.
If you don't mind sharing, where does your family live? Or because
Um,
you're in lockdown?
yeah, so we come from like a really small town. It's just like 40 minutes south of Madison. So my family just like stays there. while I'm in school because that's where they live.
So how did you see the COVID-19 outbreak affect that community?
So it's like a really small town. So I guess a lot of people thought that like they were kind of immune to it because yeah, because like it's really small and they didn't think that they would catch it, but it spread like really fast once it was there. Um, but yeah, other than that, yeah, that's about it.
So as it started to spread, did you see people change their opinions in day-to-day activities based on this, or were they just
um,
waiting for it to pass?
I think they kind of just waited for it to pass. They either said that they got it and that they were fine, or that um, I don't really think that they changed their opinion too much about it. They just said that they got it and they just went on with their lives. But
How how did that community respond to the mask mandates and stuff?
um, I think it's like pretty split. Like I think like half of the community was like for it, and half of it them just like wasn't too bothered by the mask mandate or like it being enforced. Um, so it just depended on like I think on like personal preference back there. And as I said, like they don't really enforce it all too much in public places. So yeah.
Yeah. So if you don't mind sharing, what have you been your primary sources of news during the pandemic?
Um, I would say this is a really hard one.
Yeah.
So I so there's like an app on my phone that gives me it's Apple News and it just like gives me like alerts all the time. So I keep up with like the big things, but like the small things like I wouldn't, or but when something like catches my attention, I would click on it. And usually like the sources that I would use would be like the Washington Post. Like I try not to be like biased and um you know go to like one source or rather than the other. But so I try to like I don't know, it's basically just like what comes up is what I see and I try to look into it. And
And
yeah.
with social media, we're getting news from every single
Yeah.
direction and just trying to decide what to
Yeah.
look at and what to believe.
Yeah.
Would you say your news sources have changed over the course of the pandemic, or has it kind of just stayed that way?
um I would say I think it's kind of just stayed that way. I think I used to I used to use CNN a lot more frequently, but now I don't do that as much. I try to just like stick to like more factual or as possible. Um, but I don't think it's changed too much, no.
Do you think there are important issues that the media may not have been covering during the pandemic?
Um, I think there's a lot of things that have been difficult to cover. So I don't really know how to answer this one, but
Yeah.
I think yes and no. Um, there's someone documenting something somewhere and everywhere. So like a little bit of yes and no. I don't know.
Yeah. So have you or anyone you known gotten sick during the COVID-19?
Yeah. So my roommate actually got sick with COVID um, last semester. It was during November. So she had a quarantine and I had a quarantine as well, but I didn't get sick and my family didn't get sick. Um, but yeah.
So how many days total did you have to quarantine?
We quarantined for about 2 weeks.
Did you just quarantine in your dorm room then?
So I actually live off campus.
Oh,
So my roommate, she stayed here. Um, yeah, it's uh I was actually not here, but here when she got the news. And so I went back home.
mhm.
Um, yeah, yeah.
How would you describe quarantine process? Because I mean, 2 weeks is a long time to sit there and be by yourself or around other people or the same
Yeah,
people for a long period of time.
yeah, it was really difficult. I got tested right before we found out that she was sick. So I knew that I didn't have and I didn't have contact with her like that little period before we found out. So I went back home and I stayed at home. I didn't go anywhere. It was difficult as I mentioned before because our house is like really small.
Yeah.
Um, so I say it was like really difficult at first, but then I kind of just like got used to it. And like classes, I had to communicate with like my professors, and sometimes keeping up with that material was a little hard, but was manageable, I think.
Did your roommate get tested because they were feeling ill or because it was just a routine test?
So it was actually around the time of the elections, and so right after that, she started feeling sick, and I had mentioned to her that I was going to get a COVID test just because it was frequent, like for me to do it. At that time, we weren't testing, or the university wasn't testing like off-campus students. Um, but I suggested that she went to go get herself tested, and she did. And she didn't think she was sick with COVID, but she was. So that's how she got tested.
So she didn't really have any major symptoms. And if you hadn't suggested, she might not have even went to get tested.
So when I suggested it, when I had suggested it, she wasn't, but it was like when I hadn't had communication with her, that's when she got sick, like really sick. And that's when they called her. So it was between the period that she got her test and that she got her results when she felt like the most symptoms.
So, other than the physical ways that COVID-19 has been affecting people, how do you think people's mental health have been during this pandemic?
Um, I think a lot of people have struggled with their mental health. Um, During the pandemic, it's really easy to feel down, especially when you don't have like your daily activities just like keep you distracted or occupied. So I know it's been hard for a lot of people. Um, yeah.
Yeah. um, have you or anyone known had concerns about getting the vaccine?
um, I know my dad has concerns about getting the vaccine. I think a lot of people do just
Yeah.
because of like the timing and everyone's got like their opinions about it. Um, but yeah.
If you don't mind me asking, did you receive the vaccine? And if so, did you have any side effects?
I did receive the vaccine. I'm like fully vaccinated now. Uh, and like after my first shot, or yeah, my first dose, I was just like I just felt like a little nauseous, but not really, and I didn't feel anything after my second dose.
And do you remember which vaccine you got?
I got the Pfizer vaccine.
And what was your experience with getting access to the vaccine?
It was actually fairly easy for me. I was one of like the first students on campus to be able to get it. I became eligible through the university because I'm employed
Mm-hmm.
through the school. So I got it right away, and I think like the whole process was fairly easy. It just took a long time, the process itself, because there was a lot of people trying to get it.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you were a UWC student and you're a biology major. Has the pandemic changed how you've thought about your major at all or what you want to do in the future?
No, I think it's just kind of reinforced it with like what I want to do. I know a lot of my professors talk like especially because it like the material correlates so much with like what's going on in the world. So I have like a better understanding of like what's going on, and so I think it's just kind of like reinforced my wanting to continue with my biology major.
Has there been any big challenges you've faced while learning online or just any major things to overcome?
Um, Definitely like getting motivation to do my schoolwork online. Um, it's really hard to come up with like a system, especially since it's like, because when you have class in person, you know that you have to be somewhere at a certain time, and it's a lot more difficult to do that when you're online, especially when like not everyone is watching over you or like watching what you're doing. So I definitely think that like getting the motivation to do to keep up with all the work is like a lot.
Yeah.
Um,
So something kind of interesting is you were also working on collecting oral histories for the Western Wisconsin COVID-19 Archive Project, but you were focusing specifically on the goal of documenting the undocumented. Would you like to tell me more about that project and your experience with it?
Yeah, so I got recommended to work on this project with Dr. Casey last semester. And I just started off as kind of like an intern making calls to the different farm workers on our list that we had, and then setting up interviews with them and conducting interviews with them. So that's just kind of how we did it. And then it's kind of slowly progressed to going on site and collecting information that way, and then conducting interviews in person as well.
Um, what was the biggest challenge you faced during this project?
I think one of the biggest challenges I faced was definitely getting like in touch with like the interviewees, especially since a lot of them it was like a lot of like technology things. When we try to do like interviews over Zoom, it was just a lot more difficult than doing it in person. So definitely just like getting communicated with them and like actually setting up an interview and actually starting it.
What was the most common response you got when you asked for an interview?
Um, so um, when I asked for the interview, a lot of people said that they would think about it,
Mm-hmm.
but that they were interested. But I was mostly just like focused, like a majority of the project was like translation, transcribing, and then like calling the people that had already said yes and gave us like their contact information. Um, so yeah, it was just like mostly contacting them, but a lot of them said that they were like interested and like um, yeah, but we didn't really hear like a response from them.
So the people that you actually interviewed, how did they seem to respond to being interviewed?
Um, they uh they were pretty good about it. Um, a lot of people shared a lot of like really interesting uh things from experiences from the pandemic. So I think it went really well.
What was the most shocking thing or different insight to these people's experience with the pandemic that you learned? Was there anything that you're just like, wow, I did not even think of that?
Um, um I don't know if there was like that really big like wow like surprising
Mhm.
factor, but I know that I was like really intrigued with when I would listen and they would talk about like their work and like their work schedules and like um sometimes with like the enforcing or the non-enforcing of um like CDC guidelines and things like that. So that was just yeah, like it was expected, but it's still like surprising to hear.
Mhm. Did they talk about some problem that you did not initially consider about the pandemic, or is it just kind of the CDC guidelines and their work schedule that?
Yeah, it was just kind of like CDC guidelines and like work scheduling.
So, what did most of the stories look like from the people that you got interviewed? What were most of the responses?
So a lot of people just talked about like their work, um, and like how that has changed a lot. Also talked about like their kids and having to switch to online learning. So that was a lot of it. Um, yeah, just like telling like their personal experiences, um, and like uh, yeah, like their opinions on like their local communities. A lot of them also talked about like their families like back in Mexico and stuff.
Mhm.
So that was also pretty interesting to learn about too.
Yeah. So Like they're talking about their families and is there things in Mexico happening with the pandemic that
Yeah,
was about?
yeah, so they would talk about, like, how the communities in Mexico, like, how they would be, like, enforced or not enforced, to, uh to adhere to like the CDC guidelines and things like that, or like their worries with like their families in Mexico getting sick with the virus and things. Yeah, just like experiences like that.
So doing these oral histories can sometimes be unpredictable because people are unpredictable. Is there a lot of things you have to change throughout this process of rapid response collecting? Has it been kind of a learning process?
Yeah, at the start of it, we did have like some questions that we realized that were not like completely appropriate to ask with people who wanted to remain anonymous. So we did have to like scratch some of those out. And then like with like the vaccines becoming distributed like in the middle of our project, we started asking questions like about the vaccines too. So it was definitely a learning experience that we kind of just figured out along the way.
What was it like actually going on site to these places and speaking with them?
I thought it was a really great opportunity to just kind of see like the community coming together and just learning about people's experiences just in person, especially like in like a medical setting. I thought that was really neat.
Do you want to describe what it was actually like, what you were doing on the on site? So what the
Yeah,
process was that you went through?
yeah. So I went to two clinics here in Eau Claire, and so I was there as like an interpreter sort of, and also like for part of the project I would like collect interest for the interviews, um, and I would also kind of like guide them through like the process and just kind of explain like what it is that like the paperwork and what it is that the nurse was doing, and like the side effects of the vaccine and things like that. But yeah, then afterwards we would like hand out our promotional material and try to get interest um, for the project.
How did most people respond to you when you were asking them things or speaking with them?
Um, a lot of people were really open to it, um, to participating. I didn't personally have like any interviews like in person, um, but a lot of people said that they were interested. But yeah, we still haven't heard from them. But yeah,
Yeah.
they were open to it.
Has your experience with this project transformed how you think about the pandemic at all or given you new
Um,
insight?
it's given me more insight. Um, I definitely feel like as the pandemic keeps going, I keep learning about it too. And just seeing like how everything kind of fits together, like definitely has changed since the beginning. Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to share about that project, like interesting things or experiences or stories?
um,
Sorry, that's a really open-ended question.
yeah. I think like the whole thing was just a really good experience overall. Um, it really helped me kind of grow like as a researcher and just like learn to improvise, and I learned a lot from like the oral histories and just being on site. Um, yeah, I think it was a really beneficial experience, and I think the project will do really good to a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see what stories they collect.
Yeah, I think so too.
Is there anything else you'd like to share about your experience with the pandemic or anything else?
Um,
Or just how you're feeling about it now that we're kind of almost seems like light at the end of the tunnel stuff's kind of opening back up again.
yeah, I feel like there's hope for it to end pretty soon, and um, I mean, it's a struggle. Like everyone has like their own personal experiences and challenges. And thankfully, I haven't had like too many negative experiences with the pandemic. And my family's been doing great too. But I know it's not like that everywhere. And so um, hopefully cases continue to go down, and people continue to get vaccinated and things. So Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to share your story and experiences with me.
Yeah, thank you again for having me.
No problem.